The 80s are back, at least on your TV and cinema screens. From references in Stranger Things, Cobra Kai on Netflix, to Star Wars everywhere, Tom Cruise Top Gunning again, and the real Ghostbusters answering their phone, all up on the big screen. It was only a matter of time till the king of 80s movies himself reclaimed his throne. Eddie Murphy, or rather Axel Foley, returns. I'm a child of the 80s, and I'm more than a little nostalgic. But even I choke on Memberberries once in a while and get sick of Hollywood constantly microwaving movies and TV shows from my childhood. But when it's done right, I mean, who wants their childhood franchises to suck? Not me. As a lover of storytelling, I think the world needs great stories and storytellers, old and new. Or in this case, new and old. And I think Eddie Murphy is one of those great storytellers. Hear me out. I know it sounds crazy, but work with me. He's not just a funny guy and an occasionally great actor, but from his very beginnings, he's hilarious. Groundbreaking stint on Saturday Night Live in the late 70s, early 80s. He's sell out funny to this day, though highly cancelable stand-up comedy shows, and his one-time dominance of the big screen. He was like Will Smith before Will Smith in the 1980s. When Murphy was on, he was on fire. But when he's off, so Beverly Hills Cop 4, is he off or on? Well, if this swanky outfit didn't give it away, yes, he's on. This is how you do a legacy sequel. The Beverly Hills Cop franchise ain't no Godfather Part 1 or 2, maybe not even 3. And its film direction, it certainly ain't no Fellini or Stanley Kubrick. But it was a ton of fun, with the obvious exception of Part 3, universally disliked, which some would say is the Return of the Jedi of the trilogy, except I love Return of the Jedi, and that comparison is blasphemous. I was way too young, at least legally, to watch the first two Beverly Hills Cop movies when they came out in the very early and mid-80s, but I caught up with them in my teens, and boy, was Eddie Murphy the man. Everyone loved Eddie Murphy. You know, I used to wonder if he walks around with the Axel theme in his head. I know I would. You know, walks into the shop to get a pint of milk and that theme is playing. As we all know by now, there's a new Beverly Hills Cop movie out on Netflix. And obviously I'm not going to do a straight review, as everyone and their monkey's done that by now.
Many months later.
But in true 80s kid fashion, I'm going to put on my nostalgia goggles and discuss why I think this movie gets it right in terms of following the Hollywood trend of bringing back old dinosaur IP franchises, and this time from the 80s. And so far, I'm digging it. So let's go back in time in the DeLorean. Hopefully they don't bring that franchise back. It's about 1986. You had the original movies of most of these current legacy sequels hitting theaters the first time around. With Star Wars, you had The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi by 1983, Beverly Hills Cop, the original, and Ghostbusters in 1984, and Top Gun in 1986. These great 80s movies were fun, bombastic entertainment first, before the idea of franchise building. Neither of these movies, I think, felt they were going to get sequels, except maybe Star Wars. George had a plan. They just wanted to make entertaining movies as a priority, and if lightning struck once, they tried to make it strike again. Like any time in Hollywood history, they were all about the money, but also celebrating big, bombastic storytelling and popcorn experiences at the same time. Remember when movies did that? Remember, the 80s were the decade of excess and more. They weren't trying to preach to us or change the world, indoctrinate us with propaganda, at least not in a very obvious way. Yes, the 80s was a time of big cultural crossover moments. For example, particularly in black culture that became mainstream culture, you had Michael Jackson and the famous Motown 25 moonwalk. And then for cinema, you had Eddie Murphy. Both were black men, but for Eddie, he was doing it for movies and TV, what Michael Jackson did for music, where you could define the era of the 80s by those two guys alone. It's arguable that out of all of Murphy's movies, Beverly Hills Cop is probably one of the most closest associated to him. So in many ways, it was a no-brainer to make sequels, but not quite a no-brainer to make a fourth entry, especially after Beverly Hills Cop Part 3. So, the whole approach of the new Beverly Hills Cop movie, I think, was to learn from the lessons of the major disappointment that was 2020's coming to America. But more about that in another video. With Beverly Hills Cop 4, this movie was made exactly like what people wanted from the previous movies. They didn't try to rejig it, they didn't try and make it family friendly or PG-13 or change it fundamentally, but they gave the people what they wanted and expected, and it worked. Who knew? I believe this is the success formula for any legacy sequel in a franchise. Paging Last Jedi. We've seen that recently with the Ghostbusters movie, Afterlife, and to some degree, Frozen Empire. From what I've heard, as I've not actually watched that movie yet. I know, movie tickets are getting expensive. You definitely saw it with the tremendous success of Top Gun Maverick, and on the TV screen with the Cobra Kai series, a sequel show to the Karate Kid movies. All of the aforementioned have done this with tremendous success, bringing the old gang back together and being loved by audiences that weren't even a twinkle in their mummy and daddy's eye the first time round.
I got a bad feeling about this.
So here's a question. Have you ever seen a sequel to an old classic movie disrespect its legacy characters? Bringing back those beloved characters to fail? There are definitely pitfalls to avoid with bringing back legacy characters from the past. A movie I thought that did this partially well at the time was Star Wars The Force Awakens back in 2015. It was a huge joy to see the old characters, Han, Leia, little bit of Luke, back again after that time 30 years. However, that franchise also illustrates how not to do it. Essentially, number one, don't on your legacy characters. From Han Solo being a deadbeat dad, Leia being a mother who puts her work before her child, to Luke doing a runner off to a distant planet, either went back to square one or went completely out of character, transforming from heroes to zeros pretty quickly. They doubled down on this in The Last Jedi, with Luke Skywalker almost murdering his nephew Ben and becoming a hermit. I know he saw the light by the end. And he saw the error of his ways after a prep talk by Grandmaster Yoda. But we also had almost 2 hours of him as grumpy old hermit, drinking milk straight from a creature's glands. Get off my property, Luke, before a glimmer of his old self. And to this day, there are audiences still upset about that. So it does raise the question, can movie characters change, especially when you see them many years later, and still be true to themselves? Though I agree that 30 years later, when you revisit a character, they shouldn't be exactly the same as when you last left them. There is an argument made by screenwriters, in that case like Lawrence Kasdan, that you want to see characters develop and grow and be different people. Yeah, that's real life, but that isn't the point of fantasy space opera franchises built on archetypes or going to the movies. This isn't Kramer versus Kramer or War and Peace. Don't fundamentally change characters that are beloved for a reason. Respect the source material. But I get it, characters don't just change in terms of their personalities, but they kind of age. So how can filmmakers handle aging characters in a believable way then? Well, update the story and characters by all means. Just remember what we loved about them in the first place. With Axel Foley, he has changed somewhat because he's 30 plus years older, but he's still fundamentally the same Axel. Not as action heavy, as fast, slick, reckless, smart-mouthed, etc., but still funny. He's believably the same character, just 3 decades older, if not too much wiser. What makes a good introduction then for a new character in a legacy sequel? Because you can't just have the old characters running around, especially when they look a little bit, in some cases, worse for wear. You've got to inject some new, fresh blood in there, particularly for the current audience. So if you're going to introduce new characters, do it organically. Don't shoehorn people in and try to push them into the spotlight. Let it be part of the story and let the old legacy characters, if they need to come out of the spotlight, shuffle them out gracefully. Don't do what the Star Wars sequel trilogy did, in my opinion, which was to diminish the classic characters, to bolster up and build up the new ones. J.J. Abrams and other creatives literally said that when it came to that franchise, once you bring Luke Skywalker into the storyline, he takes over. So you have to get rid of him quickly. So once you bring in a Han Solo again, you've got to take down those characters a few pegs to give your new characters a fighting chance on screen. I hear them, but I'd say just figure it out. You may disagree and ask, what's more important for sequels? Honoring the past or creating something new? We know that Hollywood is a pretty cynical place, and one of the reasons why they diminish the old characters is because you can't sell them to the young audiences in the same way. You've already got 80s kids like me. You need fresh young faces to appeal to the Gen Z or whatever letter of the alphabet we're on right now. You might disagree with me and ask what's more important for sequels, honoring the past or creating something new. Just get rid of the old and use them as a support system is extremely cynical. It's their cynical attempt to build a franchise on new younger actors and characters rather than honoring those who went before and respecting your audience who really, really love those characters. Remember, in film, characters don't age. They remain the same. So if you're gonna bring them back all old and weathered, tread carefully, respect them, and make it matter. So did Axel F strike the right balance in bringing back old characters on the beat of Beverly Hills? Interestingly, in Axel F, Eddie Murphy, the youngest looking one of the OG bunch. He looks far younger than he's 63 years. On the other hand, no disrespect meant, they brought back John Ashton as Taggart, who, being kind, clearly shows his age and has aged the most. No, he was the eldest. Judge Reinhold, I don't think is older than Eddie Murphy. I think they're around the same age. Some comments of the movie have picked up on this and have done a bit of age shaming, which I'm not going to do in this video, but I do think they were smart to bring in younger characters like Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Taylor Page. If you saw the old gang reunited for the entire movie, it would be more than a distraction. and might look like an escape from a Beverly Hills retirement home and not this action-packed adventure. Too far? So how can nostalgia be used effectively in movies without being cheesy? Can you imagine the whole 2 hours focusing on that? The complaints would have been numerous. To avoid things like this, don't just rely on Memberberries. Remember this? Remember that scene? Remember that callback? Here's a musical cue. Axel F was full of Memberberries, but it used them smartly, like icing on a cake, rather than being the entire cake, and brought some things new with it for the ride too. So when you did see Taggart and Rosewood in a similar looking scenario and do a one-liner, it was earned and you welcomed it, rather than roll your eyes at another piled on callback. But where should the balance lie for a successful legacy sequel? Many legacy movies are entirely made up of Memberberries, the whole point of existence. While Axel F doesn't break from this and used certain musical cues and soundtrack songs to evoke feelings and vibes from the original movies, it did serve a clear purpose. Ultimately, the priority should be to tell a good story. And Axel F did that. It wasn't a groundbreaking story and the script won't get any Oscar noms, but it did enough to get our lead character from A to B and where he needed to be and feel like an organic part of the franchise. A genuine sequel that could have come out in the late 80s or early 90s, rather than some 30 years later. It did the basic job. If only more handlers of classic IPs did the same, giving us something on par with the original content rather than woefully subpar and just feel they were exploiting what we loved to try and get our hard-earned money. So, how to bring back a dead franchise? And trust me, Beverly Hills Cop was dead. What are the magical ingredients for a successful legacy sequel then? Well, you can take a leaf out of the books of Ghostbusters, Top Gun Maverick and Cobra Kai for starters, as they worked fantastically well. But in my opinion, my humble opinion, I'd say numero uno, don't disrespect the legacy, be it characters, be it situations, be it the foundation of story. Yeah, we're watching you, The Last Jedi. We're watching you, The Rise of Skywalker. Those movies prove that when you diss the hero of the earlier movies, it's almost unforgivable in the fan base. Number 2, don't change things trying to be clever. There's a reason why people came and watched those movies in the first place. It's arrogant if you're a new creative team to think you know better than the people that made it a success in the first place. I'm so looking forward to Alien Romulus from Fede Alvarez. Is it Alvarez? Fede Alvarez. Because of that very thing. In an article, he said how he's not trying to reinvent the wheel. So he's not trying to reinvent the wheel and try and be clever and postmodern with it. He's just bringing back the Alien franchise in a way that everyone loves and frankly haven't experienced since Aliens in 1986. So our next point is a bit similar to the previous one. Number 3, respect the source material. Honor what went before, not just go around the block again. It's actually understanding why people love the movie, why people love the franchise, what it speaks to the culture, what it speaks to storytelling itself, the lore, canon, not going against things and concepts established in the world of the movies itself. Update things? Sure, but don't use the movie as a vehicle to test modern ideas, social politics, and trying to state a message when it wasn't that deep in the first place. Example again, Star Wars, which is a space opera. Do you really need to be talking about sexuality and all sorts of progressive social ideas in a situation where people are using laser swords and going pew pew? I digress. Oh yeah, and when you're bringing back old characters like an old friend, let them introduce the new characters. You immediately like the new person that way because you really like your old friend. If they did that on screen, like bringing in the children of Han and Leia and maybe Luke, there would have been an immediate bond to those characters, but then make them earn it in the following films to come. You only get one good introduction. Now, this is a big one. Don't just do Memberberries for Memberberries' sake. They have to have a point. If you're bringing something back from an old movie, be it a vehicle, a line of dialogue, a musical cue, or a once thought to be lost lightsaber, make sure it really needs to be there and serves a point in this story, not just this is a story for another day kind of deal. And finally, just tell a good story. I don't care if it's a sequel, a requel, a reimagining, a rehash, a reboot, or better still, a brand new idea. Just tell a good story. Don't waste my theatre ticket and popcorn soda money, and we're all good. Axel F gets an Axel B from me. See what I did there? I know it's a bad dad joke, but it kind of wrote itself. So what do you think of Axel F? Do you, like me, think it was funny and close to A-grade entertainment, but just fell a little bit off the mark, hence the B+? Or it should be a lower grade? Am I looking through nostalgia goggles here again? Or do you think it's closer to an F and a movie that just fails on every count and shouldn't have been revisited in the first place? You might be one of the rare people on planet Earth that thinks Beverly Hills Cop 3 is the best one and a stone cold masterpiece. Either way, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.